In this section, we're going to be covering statements in Lua. We will be covering the if and for statements, which we will be using in the next few chapters. We'll also be covering the and or operators, which are used quite commonly in if statements. And they are operators used in there, and they are considered part of expressions, but they're most commonly used in an if statement. So we're going to go ahead and open up the main file and the two final files that are included in the statement section. And just like the past two examples, we're going to go ahead and use the main file to do some hands-on examples, and then the if and for cover what we go over in the code provided. So once you have all three open and you have your project set up to run through the Corona editor, what I want you to do is go ahead and do if 1 equals 1, then type end. So this is a basic if statement in Lua. If statements have to be followed by a then remark, and they have to be finalized with an end statement. And what occurs is anything between these two lines, no matter how much space there is, will only be done if this expression is true. So what we'll do is we will print the number 2 if these two are true, and we'll see that a 2 has been printed. So we could do multiple lines here. We could do print 1, and you'll see it does both. Now, if we were to make this a variable, and then see if that variable follows that expression, you'll see that we did not get 2 and 1 to print, because this is not true. So variable equals 2, so this is basically saying if 2 equals 1, then print these things. So because that's false, it won't print. Now, on the most basic level, an if statement is only checking to see if it's a true or a false. So if I was to write just if true, then, this will pass, because it's only checking to see if it comes out as a true or false. Whereas if I was to say if false, then it won't run this code. So we'll go ahead and test this. We'll have the true print 1, and we'll have the false print 2. And we'll see that it printed 1, because this is true, and this is false. So that's basically how an if statement works. So as you can see, there's plenty of examples here, but we're going to go ahead and go through a few more. So we can do if 5 is greater than 6, then print true. And we'll see this does not print true, because 5 is not greater than 6. But if we were 5 is less than 6, we'll see that we got a true print, because this expression is a true fact. So we can also do arithmetic here. So as an example, let me make var equals 2. If we say if var is less than 3 plus 3, then we're going to get a true statement, because 2 is less than 3 plus 3 is 6. So on either side of the if statement, it doesn't need to be one specific number or variable. It can be an arithmetic expression. So it could be 3 plus 3 minus 1 plus var divided by 2. Like, it could be a whole collection of items here, and it's still going to check to see if this total expression is greater than var. So it is in this case, so it prints true. So that's the basics of an if statement. Now what we're going to do is look at some else and else ifs. So another part of if statement is that if you run an if statement, you have the chance to compare to the opposite of an if statement in the same statement. So if we say if var is equal to 1, then, and this would be our normal if statement as we've shown, but instead of just doing an end, what we can actually do before the end, in this in-between section, we can have an else. And what an else does is if this isn't true, then it will run the else and then anything else that is possible. So if this is true, then any falses will run here. So print true, print false. And you'll see here that it printed false because var does not equal 1. And of course, if we made var equal 1, it will print true because this is true, so it runs this chunk of code. So if this comes out to be true, it'll run whatever's in this space, and if not, then it'll run whatever else. So whatever we put here comes out true, it runs this. If you have an else, then it runs that if false. So that's the basic of an else statement. Next, we're going to go ahead and look at else if. So if we do if var equals 1, then, and if we have this standard if statement, we can do else if, and that's one word, no space, else if var equals 2, then. And now what it's going to do is, if this is not true, then it will go to the next statement. So it'll go to this else if. And now it's going to check to see if this is true, and if this is true, it'll run the next section. So we'll go ahead and print those numbers. So if var equals 1, then print 1. Else if var equals 2, then we'll print 2. And you'll see here that it's printing 1 because var is still 1. So if we change var to 2, it's going to check and see that this isn't true, so it's going to go to here, and it's going to find that this is true, and it's going to print 2. So we have 2 here. You can actually link up multiple else ifs in the same statement, so we can have more than one here. Oops. And then, so right now it's finding that this is false, so it's going to the next step. It's finding that this is true, so it's printing this, and it's not even checking this because it's already found a true statement, and then it goes to the end. So no matter what's here, right now it does not matter because it found a true statement. Now if we put this to 3, we'll see that it will find that this is not true, this isn't true, it'll make it to this one, find that it is true, and do whatever's in this space. Lastly, we can actually have else ifs and else statements. Now, an else statement, you'll notice, does not have a then, while else if statements do. An else statement is just a catch-all if all of the previous statements do not turn out. An else must be last. You cannot have an else if after an else, because this is, if everything hasn't worked, if everything is not true, then you run this code. So if you ever have an else if and an else, the else is going to be the last statement in an if statement. So let's go ahead and print this as false. And we'll see that it's still going to print 3 because var is still 3. But if we change var to 10, then when it finds that all of these are false, it's going to run this, and it's going to print the term false. So that's the basics of an if statement, along with else if and else. Next I'm going to show you and or. So and statements and or statements are the ability to make multiple comparisons in the same set of expressions. So if we do if var is greater than 5 and var is less than 20, then, and this line of code, it will only run this if statement, or only run this chunk, if both of these things are true, because it's an and statement. So if true and true, then it will do something. So to put this in the basic form, let's go ahead and print, and let's see if it prints var. So it did print var, because var is greater than 5 and less than 20 in this situation. So the basics of how this works is, it's just like earlier when we had if true, then. So it's the same structure, but with an and, it just checks to see if the second element is true. So if we had if true and true, it will run. But as soon as one of those is false, it will not run that chunk of code. So as long as one is not true, it will not work. And you can chain up as many as you need with and statements. So as soon as it hits a first false, it will not work. But if all of these are true, then it will go through and print. So let's give these examples. If var equals 10 and 1 equals 1, let's skip ahead here and let's say var is less than 20. So if all 3 of these are true, it will run this code. And you see here it went ahead and ran and printed this statement. So that is the basics of an and statement. The next statement we're going to look at is the or statement. So the OR is very similar to the AND. It's comparing multiple expressions and seeing if they are all in a certain situation. But with an OR statement, all it takes is one element to be true. So if we do if var equals 10 or var equals 1, then this will print because var, in fact, does equal 10. So in the same example as before, what we have here is a true and a false. And as long as any of these are true, it will print. Now, if none of them are true, then it will not run the code in here. But as long as any of these statements are true, we get this code to run. So that is an OR statement. Now you can, in fact, in a more advanced form, use ands and ors together to create a larger structure of comparisons. So to give you an example of that, and we're going to use parentheses as well. So if we say var equals 10 and var is less than 20, or var equals 1, then print. So in this situation, this is going to print 10 because var does equal 10 and var is less than 20. But if we change var to just 1, we will see that it also prints. It also succeeds here because it's checking to see if this is true or this is true. So even though this AND statement is here, because of the parentheses, it checks this as one total statement. So we're finding that this is false, but this is true, so it prints the var. So that is the basic of if statements using ands and ors. The next tutorial chunk, we're going to cover for loops. So now we're going to go ahead and look at the for statement structure. Loop over a block of code for a preset amount of time, or a preset specific number of times. So we're going to go ahead and create a basic for loop. So we're going to do for iter, which is just going to be short for iteration, equals 1, comma 3, do. And in the same way that the if statements needed a then at the end, a for loop needs a do and then an end. So we have for iter 1 comma 3 do. We're going to print iter. So you'll see we got a print for 1, 2, and 3. The reason for this is that a for loop starts on the first number and it goes to the next number using a default of an increment of 1. So this is starting at the value here and it's iterating, it's adding 1 until it reaches this statement. So we have 1, then 2, then 3. So if we change the 3 to 7, for instance, it will start at 1 and continue to iterate until it reaches 7. Now it doesn't need to start on 1, we could start it on 3. It will start on 3 and work its way to 7. So this is a very basic example. This is very useful for running through a specific set of items or doing a certain task multiple times. So to give you an example, we're going to do var equals 1, and then we are going to have var equal itself plus 1 for every loop, and then we're going to print var. So you'll see here, var started as 1, but on the very first run, it adds 1 to itself, so it becomes 2. Then it loops through again, adds another 1, becomes 3, and so on up to 6. So even though var started at 1, it's now 6 because this was looped through a total of 5 times, and it had a 1 added to it each time. So this is a very basic example of how to use a for loop. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and see what else we can do in for loops. One of the other important elements is the actual iteration or increment amount. So the most basic example, as we see here, it's adding 1 every time. So if we started var at 0, we'll see it adds 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 7, because this is what the for loop is doing. It's adding 1. However, if we give the for loop a third number, we can have it iterate at a different rate. So now it's iterating at an increment of 2. So if we print iter, we'll see that it starts at 1, then it becomes 3, then it becomes 5, and then it becomes 7. because we're adding 2 to it every time we run this. So it still starts at 1, so the first time it's going to be 1, then it becomes 3, 5, and 7, and it skips the even numbers, and that is because we're adding by 2. Now, a very useful aspect of this is we can actually go down in numbers. So we can start at 10, go to 1 by -1. So now it's incrementing in a negative direction. It's going down 1. So it's going to start at 10 and work its way to 1, as you see here. So this is a great opportunity if you ever want to count down through a set of information, and we will cover this more when we do the tables chapter. So that's the basic of a for loop. Now, we do have some more advanced things which we'll show here, and one of the most advanced ones, or the one that you'll be using most common, is the concept of having multiple elements internal to each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to have iter go from 1 to 10, and we are going to have in here if var equals iter then, and then we're going to have it print var, and then comma iter. So now if var and iter are the same, it's going to print when it loops through. So you'll see we have a 3 and then a 3. So let's put an else statement in here, and with this one, let's print the same thing, and we'll see that when it's not true, it prints this. So var is staying the same, it's at 3, we're not changing it at all. And iter is constantly growing, so we have 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, and so on. But it's hard for us at this point to tell the difference between these two. So let's give them a difference. Let's have this one print true, and this one print false. And we'll see here that we have false, false, then the true statement when they become the same, and so forth. So this is a great structure. This is a statement within a statement, and it's something you're going to use quite often in code. Very rarely is just a for loop or just an if statement going to be enough. Generally, it's a combination of the two, as well as some of the more advanced structures that we'll learn later on that create this code. So that's the basic of a for loop, and you can go ahead and take a look at this for a more commented version of it as well. In the next section, we're going to cover functions, and functions are going to be the meat of our projects when we get back to making Corona projects.